So thanks for tuning in for another episode of The World of Tash. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about how do you find what your kink is, and also more importantly, how to start talking about it with your partner. So firstly, I think by now you might have started getting a bit of a feel of what your kink might be. We've mentioned quite a lot of different things you might want to explore, especially under BDSM. But what I would recommend is start looking online, start looking at different videos, see what triggers your interest. Also, there's a lot of social kink groups out in your community. Really, as I said, the internet is at our fingertips these days. All you've got to do is get on, get active, connect with people. There's also some apps specifically for kink life. And you can join those apps and try and find like-minded people and start exploring maybe with someone from that community. So my advice to people wanting to find out what their kink is just to be really open-minded, have a look around and explore. Kink parties also are in most capital cities. Another really good way to kind of dip your toe in, where you can just go along. They are purely social nights. Some people will be participating in play. There is no pressure to participate in play. It's a great way just to look and get a feel and see what's out there. So the next thing I really wanted to touch upon is you're at this stage, you've kind of worked out what things might interest you, what some kinks that you might want to try. The next step, especially if you're in a partnered relationship, is how do I tell my partner? And this is one that's really close to my heart because I have a lot of clients and mostly their partners do not even know they have a kink. And I think that comes out of a lot of fear that they will lose the relationship if they expose this side of themselves. And also, again, there's still a lot of kink shaming out there, which is why it's so important that we talk about this more and more. But I just want to give a bit of advice on how you could approach the conversation with your partner. So what I would call my step one is get good at communication. Now, both that individually and as a couple. So I wouldn't recommend you jump straight into this conversation if your communication skills as a couple isn't already in a great place. I would say really work on your communication skills with your partner and start having some conversations about your relationship and things that might be unsaid. Maybe if you need it, try a bit of couples counseling and therapy to really up those communication skills. Any relationship that exists in the kink world or in the world of open relationships or poly relationships or ethical non-monogamous relationships, there's a whole wide range of them, but I'm really talking about relationships that sit outside that hetero-monogamy societal example of relationships that we're all brought up to believe. They actually require more communication than any other type of relationship out there. So it's really important that step one is get those communication skills going. Step two would be don't spring it on them. Don't just be like, hey, I've been watching all this stuff about pulling on people's balls and I'd love to try it with you. Chances are you're going to scare the living shit out of them. So my advice would be to say, hey, babe, I've been thinking about a few things recently. I'd love to know when you have some time this week or whenever that we could sit down and discuss them together. I'd love to get your opinion on it and get your feedback. So it really comes out of an approach that isn't, hey, I need to talk about something and their brain flips to something's wrong, but it's something you've just been thinking about. You value their feedback and you value their perspective. So it kind of gets the person away from that fight or flight mode. So you've got the time set aside for your chat. Now, I recommend it. You don't do it just before dinner and you've got the kids running around. Make sure that you have ample time to have that chat without interruptions. So we're at that chat and we're ready to talk to our partner about these kinks that we're interested in. Now, I would say don't leap in with anything too extreme. As my favorite phrase in BDSM practice is, start slower than slow and softer than soft. Same goes for this conversation. I'd use a few softer things to go in with, nothing too extreme straight away, and then I'd wait and I'd gauge their reaction. The other thing you've got to account for is their first reaction might not be their true feelings towards the topic. And I think everyone can relate to this. You've probably had a fight with your partner and you've gone straight in for your, impulse reaction and lost it. And then a day later you realize, oh, whoops, I probably went a little bit overboard with that. So same goes with this conversation. You need to give your partner the space and allow them to have maybe not the best reactions straight away. I would try and preface the conversation with the things that you do love about the relationship and the things that you do love about your current play life. I don't know if people have worked in corporate offices where it's called a shit sandwich, where you've got to give someone negative feedback. So you start with positive feedback, you slide in the negative, and then you slide in the positive shit sandwich to soften the blow. Kind of like that concept is that start with something really light and positive and loving with your partner, and then move into the little bit more difficult conversation about something that's come up for you, maybe a kink that you're interested in, maybe it's something you want to try, and let your partner absorb that. Now, absorbing that doesn't mean waiting 10 minutes. It might mean waiting a week. It might mean waiting a month. You've got to allow your partner time to absorb that information and process it. Now, if you have a partner that's taken in the information and a long time has passed, I would recommend you check in on it, because it is easy for some people to just try and sweep things under the rug. So you might want to, whenever the time period feels right for you and your partner, say, hey, that thing we discussed a few months ago, I just wanted to check in and see if we could have a conversation about how you're feeling about it, and I really want to get your feedback. Now, fingers crossed, I'm hoping it goes well, and your partner might start to share maybe some of the things that they're interested in and their kinks. And I would really say, learn and play together. Start slow, as always, start safe, and maybe explore what each other likes. And upon that, you can build and build and build. Now, I don't want to be naive and tell everyone that if you follow these steps, the equal outcome is going to be this, because sometimes it's not. Sometimes we're going to have partners who aren't on board with our kinks. I can share my own personal journey about finding my own way to kink. I started off, as I said, very open-minded, a very sexual young female, very much into meeting up with play partners, group play, and I even went to the point of finding a therapist because I wondered, is there something wrong with me? I wondered, am I just a sex addict? Because I don't believe in these traditional monogamous heterosexual views that society has brought me up on. Luckily, I had and still have one of the most amazing therapists who made me see I wasn't an addict and there was nothing wrong with me, and that I was just exploring a very strong sexual side of myself, and it was actually in a very healthy way. So my advice would be not to shun any part of you. My advice would be, if you have a partner that is making you feel ashamed or that is making you feel weird because you've expressed your kinks, I would say you need to take a bit of a closer look at your relationship and the people you're associating with. I would say that you need to have maybe some difficult conversations about that relationship and the future. Again, I can talk from my own personal experience. In my dating life was quite difficult for quite a few years because I was very sure of who I was and my kinks and my type of lifestyle. I was also very open with people I would begin to see or date about that. As I said, being in BDSM and the kink scene, it makes you a very good communicator and you're not afraid to have those scary conversations. So I would meet someone and I would say hi and do the normal formalities. But I would say, look, this is me, this is what I am, and this is what I'm into, and it's not going to change. And I generally get 2 approaches at this point. I'd have one approach where the person would run 1,000 miles, which was completely fine by me. And the other reaction I would get is someone that would become fascinated and intrigued by me, and they'd agree to go into this lifestyle with me. But the only reason they were doing it was because of me. And that's something else I would tell people to be really wary of. I believe that you need to engage in BDSM or kink for yourself. I don't think you can do it for someone else. And I can tell you 3-4 months into each of those relationships where someone had started in the kink scene or BDSM scene for my benefit, those relationships fizzled out pretty quickly when the person realized they couldn't handle it. Luckily enough, I eventually did find a partner who was already into the kink scene as I was and was on their own journey, and we could combine our kink journeys together. Now, I'm not saying that relationships stay the same. Relationships evolve over time. Relationships change because people change. And I always remember my mother used to say to me, you either change together as a couple or you change apart. Sometimes we'll change together as a couple and sometimes we won't. Also, with these types of relationships, the rules you have today aren't going to be the rules you might have in 2 months or a year's time. For example, me and my partner, we're in an open relationship. However, we have had times where things haven't been great for outside influences in our life, personal reasons. And I've had to come to my partner and say, I'm not in a great space right now, and I need to close this down just for a couple of months. And my partner's been so supportive of that. We've talked about it and we closed our relationship down for a few months. Then in another few months, it changed again. We opened it back up, and the same with the rules. Our rules have changed over the time. We started off with some rules and now they're evolving again. So remember that a relationship has a life of its own, and you can create whatever you want to do with that. So I know we got a little bit deep there, but let's lighten it back up. I want to finish off with, you've had that conversation with your partner and you both agree that this is something you want to learn and explore together. What is my advice for newbies? I often get asked this. My first one would be, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, start slow, start soft. Bring it into your relationship in small ways. Play it around the house. Play swapping that who's in the dom role, who's in the sub role, who wants to be a switch. Role play it. Start exploring what kinks work for you and your partner. It doesn't have to be anything drastic. My next piece of advice would be keep an open mind. You might start on this journey together with kinks you've suggested, and then seeing something else or something else is taking your interest, or your partner's, for example, and there's another element brought in. Again, keep an open mind that things do change. Your interests might go in the same direction, but hey, they might go in slightly different directions, and maybe you can explore both together, or maybe you can explore them both separately. And my third piece of advice would always be stay safe, which is know what you're doing. Try and do a bit of research before you go into something, especially if you're using tools. There's a myriad of information, as I said, on the internet these days. Talk to people in the scene, go to kink parties, find a professional dom like couples have found me, get some advice, and make sure that you're playing safe, you're negotiating, you're consenting, your boundaries are there, and you're constantly communicating with each other. So that's today's episode. I know we delved into a lot of information there, but I hope everyone's found it helpful. And as always, get your kink on.